Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining today's webinar, Unlocking the Agroforestry Advantage. I'm Dan from the Land App, and today delighted to be joined by a number of key individuals from the sector, as well as to announce our latest release in line with National Tree Week. Before we get started, I just wanted to do a bit of housekeeping. The session is a webinar, which means your cameras will remain off and your microphone will keep on mute. However, that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. We have activated the question and answer function through the Q&A, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. So throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask any questions you may have. If there's time, although there's quite a bit to get through, we can stay on afterwards for a bit of a discussion, but we have got an allocated 15 or 20 minutes at the end of the session for Q&A, so please put your questions in the chat. The session is being recorded, so we will be sharing it through our YouTube channel and through our network, but please give us 3 days or so, although Kathy, who's on the call, might be able to get it done sooner than that. So what is the agenda for today? Once I finish the welcomes and intros, I'm going to pass over to Ed Colbert, who's an agroforestry design advisor. He's going to talk us through what is agroforestry, but with respect to the tool that we've built in partnership together. I'm then going to lead a demo of the new Agroforestry Design Toolkit, which is the 3 different tools that we've released to support the building of agroforestry plans, and show you just some of the use cases and how you can start to amend those plans to make them more realistic for what you want to achieve. We're then delighted to be joined by James Ramskir-Gardiner from the Forestry Commission, who's an agroforestry advisor, who's going to give us an update on the available grants that are available to support agroforestry. And then the main bulk of the conversation today is going to be a round table. And so we've got a great set of speakers, and we're really going to get under the skin of how agroforestry can support farmers, support landowners moving forward into the future. Then the final 15 minutes, I'll open up the questions to the floor, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions as well. As usual, just want to point out that we've got previous webinars on our YouTube channel. So if you go to the youtube.com/@landapp, you should be able to find them. And that covers everything from previous tool releases and product updates, right the way through to introductory training and how you can use the system. But enough about kind of Land App on its own. But just wanted to set the scene for why we're here today. So firstly, it's National Tree Week, and we've been working on this Agroforestry Designer Toolkit for over a year now. It started back in October 2023. Myself and Ed and the team at Shropshire Council, of which Nick is joining us, decided that there wasn't really an easy-to-use tool to support the, I suppose, that initial stage of designing an agroforestry scheme. So we applied to DEFRA's Trees Outside of Woodland project to get some funding, and we're really grateful for them to support the project. We then built a prototype that in April we took to Harper Adams University and got some feedback from some farmers. And so if any of those farmers are on this call, really grateful for that session. We had about 20 of us in a room testing the prototype, working out some, I guess, some sticking points, but also how we can improve the tool. Once that feedback was complete, we then iterated the tool, and in June, we then presented it to some government DEFRA arm's length body agencies. So James is one of them, who's on the call, James Ramskir-Gardiner, but also some team at Natural England, just to make sure we aligned with the language of what we're trying to promote. We then rolled it out in July to some trusted users to make sure that we were testing it correctly. And then as of this month, we have officially released it. So it is in the product now, and you can access the full toolkit for free within the Land App. And just really grateful to all those logos at the bottom for all the support they've given, and some of them are being represented on the call today. So what I want to do is I'm going to pass it over to Ed Colbert, who's going to talk us through agroforestry and the Designer Toolkit. Over to you, Ed.
Thanks very much, Dan. And I would say wonderful to see you all, but I can't see you all. So wonderful to have you with us today. I believe we've got almost 450 people on the call. So I've been working closely with the Land App team to come up with this design tool to really help people get started with thinking about what might be possible on their farm in terms of tree planting. But just to get started, and we can jump to the next slide, I really want to just think about or help us understand what agroforestry means, because for many people it means lots of different things. But what I find often is people speak about agroforestry as if it's one thing. It's, a farming practice, when in fact, as we go to the next slide, it's much more helpful for us to consider agroforestry really as a toolbox, as a set of practices. And each of those practices is really useful for achieving certain jobs, certain goals, or overcoming certain challenges on the farm. So let's go to the next slide and have a look at those. So when we start thinking about agroforestry on our farm, or indeed if you're an advisor or someone working off farm and working with farmers, it's really important to think about these two key questions. What challenges are you or the person you're working with looking to overcome on the farm? And what opportunities might you also want to seize? So really, we're not even talking about trees or agroforestry yet, really focusing in on the current situation on the farm. If you can click for the animation, Dan. So in terms of challenges, we might be thinking about increasing climate volatility, hotter summers, wetter winters. We might be thinking about wind exposure and the damage that causes to crops or the problems it causes to livestock. We might be thinking about water issues in terms of too much water, too little water, rising input costs, pest and disease, or even looking at some other kind of input costs that we might not normally consider, but things like fencing, animal bedding, things like this, which, as costs are rising, we can be thinking about how we might overcome those, and possibly through agroforestry. In a more positive light, we might also want to focus on how we can seize new opportunities. Many people are thinking about farm diversification at the moment, and here we can consider how might we produce more and varied food crops, and indeed from trees we can get a variety of fruits and nuts, or fungi produced through timber crops as well. We might look at premium added value products. A great example of this in the Iberian Peninsula is Iberico ham, so acorn raised pork. That's not to say everyone should be raising pigs on acorns, but we can start thinking about how working with trees on farms could actually develop a new story for that product and enter into new markets. Of course, trees are known for timber production as well, biomass, and also opportunities around agritourism as well. Many more opportunities there. Almost perfect timing on the slides there, Dan. So taking a step back again, thinking about agroforestry, we can consider all these different tools in that toolbox. When we're thinking about crops, we can be thinking about how do we integrate trees with crops in horticultural systems, in which case you might think of alley cropping, or indeed forest gardens, and we'll come to these with some examples in a bit. Silvo arable, similarly with alley cropping. When we move into livestock, we can start considering integrating livestock into existing tree systems, such as woodlands or orchards in a sensitive way, or creating new systems of other forms of silver pasture alleys or living barns. And then finally, we have farm edges, and these perhaps are not often considered agroforestry for many people. But the wonderful thing to think about in the UK is that most farms, if not all farms, have got at least one hedge on them. Most have got some kind of woodland there. And if we're able to change the way we view these things, we can actually recognize ourselves already as doing agroforestry. Agroforestry doesn't have to be this new and scary thing that requires lots of new knowledge. Perhaps it's just about seeing what we already have with new eyes. So Dan's just highlighted these 7 areas, and I'm highlighting these because the Land App kind of suite of tools caters to each of these currently. So prior to this new tool being developed, there is a range of tools available on Land App that can help with hedgerows, identifying existing ones and working on setting up new ones, as well as woodland areas, which could include riparian buffers, shelter belts, and what have you. However, what we'll focus on today is where we've developed new tools to help alongside the new SFI announcements for in-field agroforestry. So here we're talking about alley cropping. Sorry, if you can jump back one, just jumping on there. So alley cropping, wood pasture, and also orchard grazing. And we'll look at those in more detail now. So on to the next slide. So if we're thinking about linear patterns, we can think about silver arable cropping, we've mentioned previously. So in the top left there, we have a short rotation coppice system, a mixture of cereals growing in the alleys with a variety of coppicable plants that in this case, so this is a Wakelands in East Anglia, are being produced for biomass, largely for biomass boiler, but also for sale of things like hazel hurdles and bean poles as well to the local market. The top right, we have a contour design for a traditional orchard. In this case, it's being grazed underground under the trees by livestock. We can see this as linear, even if they're not straight lines per se. Bottom left, we're looking at utilizing timber crops and integrating that with pasture and grazing animals. And on the bottom right, this is a design I produced a few years ago on LandApp before we had the tool in place, which was looking to integrate walnut trees across an arable field. What we've done is taken the lessons learned from various other design softwares and ways of designing systems. And if we can just click to the animation, in the design tool that we'll see Dan demonstrate shortly, come up with a way using machine learning to develop automated suggestions around how you might view agroforestry on your farm. So here we can see a great example of that with straight rows oriented north-south in this case, trying to maximize light gain for the crops in between throughout the day, and also allowing sufficient area to move around each of those alleys and the headlands with machinery on that farm as well. Go to the next slide. For some people, this idea of straight lines is not aesthetically pleasing or compatible with the farm, or indeed maybe mechanization isn't an issue for you, and you might think about more dispersed plantings of trees. So here we can think about wood pasture on the left, these kind of more open landscapes, open woodlands with dotted and dispersed trees, either in clumps or individual trees. This is also what often can be referred to as parkland in a more formal setting. And on the right, we have again a grazed orchard. So here, trees being planted using a sort of traditional format of 10 by 10 meter grids with animals grazing underneath there. If we look to the animation here, again, with the new tool, we can also, through a separate process, develop ideas of what might a dispersed tree planting system look like. So moving away from necessarily straight lines, although as you can see on the screen, you could interpret this as a linear system, but there's room to move amongst all of the trees. So we can really be more flexible with our grazing management in these systems. So there's both wood pasture option in the design tool, as well as a traditional orchard option. Jump to the next slide. As I mentioned before, we can also think about the wider sort of edge types of agroforestry. And although this hasn't been developed with this iteration of the LandApp, as I mentioned before, there are options within the LandApp to look into developing UCOs, England Woodland Creation Offer plans, and other woodland options, which you could then place in a contextual way alongside waterways to protect waters, alongside edges of fields to protect against winds, either sort of prevailing southwesterlies or winter northeasterly winds, as well as a number of tools to help with planning hedgerows there as well. Go to the next slide. Finally, I think it's really important also to mention forest gardens. This is another type of agroforestry. If we could just click onto the next animation. So here is a far more complex system. We have multi-layer or multi-strata form of agroforestry, where we're really borrowing ideas from forest ecology to think about how we can grow a variety of edible, medicinal, and other functional crops within a small area. Indeed, it could be larger, but typically these are small areas. It's worth mentioning this because we can learn a lot from this, even where we're looking towards more mechanical designs or mechanical friendly designs to increase the diversity in our systems. This is not something that the tool currently supports development of, but I think would be remiss not mentioning it. Next slide. Okay, so that was a wrap up of really what we mean by agroforestry, and hopefully this is something that kind of broadens people's perspectives of what's possible on farms. And really, a kind of key message from me, I would say, is with agroforestry and with this tool, the idea is not to tell anyone necessarily what to do or to force agroforestry as something that everyone should do, but really to give people a zero cost, very quick, easy to use opportunity to see if I was going to plant trees in my field or on the edges, what might it look like? And to then take those ideas into a further conversation, be it with an advisor or with Forestry Commission or whoever it might be, to really help you achieve those goals. Fundamentally, we need to make sure we're putting the right tree in the right place to achieve those goals that we spoke about at the beginning.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed, and we'll come back to you for the round table. So if anyone's got any questions for Ed, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will hopefully get to those a bit later. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fly over to thelandapp.com and give you a bit of a demo, whistle-stop tour of the designer toolkit. Just to reiterate, this will be kind of a high-level overview, but we have got help guidance that I'll point you to if you need any further information. So conscious that some of you may be completely new to the Land app. So just very quickly, the Land app is found at thelandapp.com. So you don't need to download anything. You just log on your laptop or your computer. And we do have a mobile app as well, where you can create a free account. And so you can create a free account by hitting enter there, and you create an email address and a password. Once you've created your free account, what you'll be done is you'll be dropped onto an interactive base map, which I will show you now. I'm just going to create a new name and call it demo. So the Land app itself is an interactive mapping platform. So hopefully you can see that we've got this interactive base map that I can zoom in and out of, and I'm just using my mouse to zoom in and out. And we've got lots of different base maps just for your benefit that you can toggle on. But for a majority of the demo, I will be using the Bing imagery. So to get started, you obviously need to find your farm. The easiest way, if you're in England, to find it, which is where this tool is focusing at the moment, is to hit New, Import Data, and then you choose the Import from Rural Payments Agency button. And from there, you can paste in your 9-digit single business identifier number. I'm just for the demo going to bring in land covers. And as just to reiterate, we've got some really good guidance on all these steps that I've just taken. So if I've moved quite quickly, I do apologize. And I'm just going to bring it into a basic payment scheme and just at least get some field parcels on a map. It looks like this. So this is our founder's farm in Surrey. There's other routes to getting to this point, but do just check the guidance. And the way that you access guidance is this little button at the top, the bottom right. Within there, you can search for, as I just did just a minute ago, you can search for agroforestry and see kind of how to create a plan, how to use the designer toolkit, etc. So lots of help to support you in your process, very much doing a bit of a showcase now. So as an advisor in this hypothetical situation, what I would want to do is just understand some potential designs for this farm. Bit of context, so we've got this field, which is a pasture grazed field. I think there's between 40 and 50 sheep in there on rotational grazing. And then this field is currently in Lucerne, which is an arable field that they will want to continue cropping into the future. So there's lots of different ways that I can look at this farm. And just to showcase some of them, I can look at Ordnance Survey data. I could look at the LiDAR data to start seeing some of the kind of more historic and topography related attributes. I could also look at data layers. So within the data layer library at the top right, I can turn on other bits of information that might support me, such as contour lines from Ordnance Survey. So we've got the OS terrain data in there. And all of these things, as Ed was just talking about, are really important when you're considering your design. Another layer, which James Ramskir-Gardiner would be happy for me to show, is we have the SFI agroforestry eligibility layer. And what this shows is just if you're applying for SFI, which blocks of land are eligible under the SFI scheme. So you do need to be within this checked area if you want to access the SFI payments. So the farm I'm looking at today isn't within that area, but you can obviously check your eligibility. And there's other routes to go through. For example, there might be countryside stewardship or private investment, but James can touch on that in a bit later. So what I want to do is I'm going to run two example designs for this farm. The first one, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a linear planting within this field, just to see what that looks like and just talk you through the tool. The first thing you want to do when you want to get a design for this field is you basically want to just tell the land app what part of the field that you're wanting to, what part of the farm you're wanting to assess. So for example, I'm just going to reload my screen. I'm going to just select this parcel, for example, and I'm going to bring it onto its own plan. And I do that by just right-clicking and hitting copy to plan, and basically bringing it onto an area of interest. So it doesn't matter which template it's in. And what that's done now is that's just focused my plan to just focus on this one field. You can run the whole farm, by the way, but I just wanted just for the demo. You then access the tool through what we call a data download. And that's accessed at the top left by hitting new, download data. And within here, you can see all the different data downloads that we offer. So for example, Ed mentioned in his intro, the UCO payments, the England Woodland Creation Offer. We've built a tool with Forestry Commission that you can use for free here as well, but please see another recording for that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this first of 3 different tools that we released around the Agroforestry Designer. And the one I'm going to go for is linear design. By hitting linear design, the first thing I'm asked is to choose a plan, choose an area of interest. And so I'm just going to use that area of interest that I created earlier. The next is I'm going to give it a name. I'm just going to give it, site 1 as a name. And then optionally, I can put in the SBI number, which just helps us get a bit more information. The next is I can, as Ed said, dictate the width of my largest machinery. So just for the demo, I'm going to say it's 24 meters. And this will basically ensure that my machinery can get down each of those rows, plus get around the headland in the design. I'm then asked by the tool, what's the purpose of the planting? So Ed's covered most of these, but for the demo, I'm going to choose shelter, and nut and fruit. So I want a bit of, food produce off it, but I'm predominantly looking for shelter. The next question is around orientation. And so Ed said earlier that his was a north-south orientation, which optimizes for light, but you might want to optimize for other things, such as wind protection that protects from the prevailing wind. If you leave it as automatic, the land app will run some calculations about what's best for your site. However, if you want to manually override that, you can change the orientation. And that might be, for example, following existing tram lines that you've got in your field. But I'm just going to leave it as automatic for now. Then you can run a single or double row if you wish. So that just dictates whether you want 1 or 2 rows of trees, and then whether you want an additional path for harvesting the fruit. So it's a form to try and sense why you're planting. Once you're happy, going to hit download now. And what that does is that now sends a request to our toolkit. So it's going to send that field parcel through a number of different questions and queries. And then hopefully in about 5 seconds, I shall refresh my screen. He says, hit refresh on my screen. And what that's doing is it's not quite finished yet. It will be running that calculation for us, and hopefully will output a design that we can all look at and amend. Hit refresh again. Ooh. Check my emails. It'll come through in a minute, I hope. While we're waiting, I might just trigger another one, and then we can look at number 1 and 2. Yeah, so while we're waiting, what I'm going to do is just going to trigger just one more of those designs. So just going to do the exact same process, but this time, instead of running the linear design, I'm just going to run the in-field dispersed design as well. So depending on the type of planting that you're practicing, will dictate the questions you're asked. So for the dispersed design, which I'm going to just call dispersed, type in my SBI number. I can give it a small headland width, such as 5. Just go a bit bigger, just to make sure my track can get around the side. And then to help align with the existing SFI and government grants, is we just tell you the categories for the density. So for example, for this type of design, if you want to apply for the very low density SFI, you need to use 30 to 50. If you want to apply for the low, you can go 51 to 130. So I can slide that and dictate how many trees, but just for this output, I'm just going to not go for 200. I want to go for 30, like so. and select the plan, which is the AOI. Okay. So that should now be running in the background as well. I'm just going to double check behind the scenes. Perfect. So it has completed. You always get worried that you're going to need to do a Blue Peter type approach. So here is the output from my linear design. And just in the name of time, I'm conscious that lots to go through, but just to talk through some of the key outputs that's happened. So the first thing that's happened is it's just displayed on a map the existing vegetation. So what that's done is that is picked up that I've got some existing trees in this field that want to be incorporated into my design. And so that just helps us, not say to plant trees on existing trees. The second thing that's also come through is this excluded regions. And so you can see up here, I've also been given a warning that there's a bit of general surface, which is actually a building within the field where, again, we don't want to be planting trees. But then the output is this linear design. So what it's done is it's taken that questions. I asked the land app to orientate the thing automatically. And so this is going to optimize for a bit of shelter, but also a bit of the slope that farm is on as well. So you notice that I was on, when I turned on the contour lines, there was water flowing from kind of west to east. The output then looks like this. So just some key points that's happened. Firstly, that the distance between these rows is going to be 24 meters. So I've got enough gap between those rows to ensure that my machinery can go through. The second thing that's happened is that it's recommended different types of trees. So it's recommended that this row in its entirety is shelter and broadleaf. And this row is fruit, semi-vigorous rootstock. And this row is vigorous rootstock. And if you've got eagle eyes, you'll notice that the planting distance between each one of those trees is different depending on the type of tree you're planting. So for example, that shelter, that broadleaf that Ed mentioned earlier are closer together, whereas those more vigorous rootstocks are further apart. So you get that different density that's out there. Other things that's happened just on this example is that there's a public footpath that runs through here. So we've kept that public footpath clear for you in this example, just to ensure that you can continue, managing that. And it's also suggested those little areas to here. What else has come through? Other things of use is obviously the headland. So you can see how much headland you've got left. Plus, if you click on the middle bit, it also tells you the remaining working area, aka how much land have I got left to graze that's been accounted for within this design. So lots of different outputs, lots of different ways to look at the data, but just in the name of time, I'm going to skim through that bit. Just for the demo, I just want to show you the one output from the dispersed design, just so we can compare them for this field. So like I said, I had one that showed the linear design, which is that top one, and then this dispersed design, exactly the same excluded regions. However, it's looking at that distribution of kind of those points. One of the key things that's relevant to the presentation that's just about to follow with James is that I now know that for this field, we've got the right density for that very low option if I were in the SFI scheme, which means I can start to move around lots of different points. So I can start to cluster them, for example, and start to arrange the design how I wish, including changing the type of tree that it is. So I can, update some of those to semi-rootstock, etc., knowing that that design has met the requirements for the right density. So you can play around with the points rather than having to try and count the points per hectare. I will finish off just very quickly showing you an email that I get. So once you've ran the design, you also get an email, and this email contains information about your design and lots of help guidance. So we point you to a number of different web pages that can support you understanding. That includes forest research. I think there's a tree council link in here as well, agroforestry benefits, and the Woodland Trust as well. So we're trying as much as possible to give you as much information as we can to work through your designs. Anyway, just in the name of time, really keen through the Q&A to answer any more questions around the designer, but hopefully that shows you how that initial tool could be used to just understand that scope, orientation, and type of planting that might happen in your farm. But I'm going to pass over now to James Ramskir-Gardiner from the Forestry Commission to talk a bit more about the funding available for agroforestry. Thanks, James. Over to you.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, everyone, for having me here to speak to you all today. As Dan said, I'm James Ramskir-Gardiner. I'm the Forestry Commission's Agroforestry Advisor covering England. I've got a lot of information I'm going to cover, so I'm going to be going quite swiftly through these slides and touch upon probably only a couple of points on each. The idea being you'll be able to watch this recording back and pause it to take it all in afterwards, as well as to be able to contact my team for further advice, which we'll get to later. Next slide, please, Dan. So, as we've seen so far, agroforestry can take multiple forms. I love Ed's analogy of agroforestry being a toolbox that we can use. Here are some examples of them across the kind of the spectrum of different agroforestry systems available. I'm going to be focusing primarily on the Elms in-field agroforestry offer here today, the one in the centre there circled in yellow. But there is funding out there for every system that you see here on the screen, whether that is government funding or through community forests, local tree planting initiatives, or charities such as the Woodland Trust. Next slide. So the new agroforestry offer through the Environmental Land Management Scheme has three components. You've got the Sustainable Farming Incentive Actions, you've got the CS Higher Tier Actions, and you've got new agroforestry capital grants. The SFI actions opened earlier this year and are available for application for managing and maintaining in-field agroforestry on less sensitive land. The CS Higher Tier Action payment rates were announced this year, but have yet to be opened for application. The new capital grants also opened earlier this year and support both the planting of in-field agroforestry as well as the planning and managing of it with the agroforestry plan. Next slide, please. The SFI actions AGF1 or AGF2 are for maintaining in-field agroforestry on less sensitive land at either a very low or low density. It's a 3-year agreement length with the expectation that applicants would roll it on for a further 3 years at the end of the agreement. So it's not a case of you just get 3 years of it and that's it. The idea is that you would hopefully continually going for it. These have got either payment rates of £248 per hectare per year or £385 per hectare per year for the corresponding density of trees. And as we've just seen in Dan's demo there, you're looking between 30 trees per hectare up to 130 trees per hectare for the SFI options. Next screen, please. So these SFI actions are compatible with the vast majority of other SFI actions and CS options currently out there. This allows you to stack grants upon the same field parcel for multiple benefits to your farm, both environmentally and financially. Here are a few compatible actions that I've pulled out so you can see the levels of funding that you could combine with the agroforestry options. Quite a few of these, combined with even the very low density option within SFI, you could be pulling in over £1,000 per hectare per year. Next slide, thank you. So, eligibility. The key phrase in the SFI action is maintaining very low or low density on less sensitive land. This means that you can only apply the SFI actions to eligible land. The details of what is categorized as less sensitive are on the screen, but the easiest way for you to see your eligibility is by using that land app and searching under the habitats data layer for the SFI agroforestry layer, which the hatching denotes the eligible land. An example of which you can see in the bottom right of my screen here. Now, those of you who might have already explored this eligibility might have noted that there are large swathes of the country ineligible for the SFI agroforestry actions due to the potential constraints that are on that land. It isn't a case of you won't be able to do in-field agroforestry, not at all. It is more just that the route you would go would be the CS higher tier agroforestry actions, as this is where you will get advisor support from both my team at the Forestry Commission, as well as our colleagues at Natural England. This is just for land where it might be within or within the buffer of sensitive land, such as SSR, triple SIs, sensitive areas to do with priority habitats or protected species, any kind of protected landscapes, such as national parks or national landscapes, such as it used to be AONBs, as well as any kind of nationally recorded historical features. Next slide, thank you. So the next three capital items I'm going to be speaking on are AF1, AF2, and AF3, which are all for the planting of in-field agroforestry trees. These are currently just available for use on SFI eligible land, but as with the actions, when CS higher tier is launched, you'll be able to use these more widely for higher tier applications of in-field agroforestry as well. AF1 pays £5.40 for the supplying and planting of an agroforestry woodland tree. There's a vast list of approved species, including native, non-native, and naturalized broadleaves and conifers. So you have plenty of choice of species which are best suited to your land, climate, and most importantly, your objective. Next slide, thank you. AF2 pays £17.83 for the supplying and planting of an agroforestry fruit tree, the types of which are listed here on the screen. The fruit and nut trees you plant must be on certified vigorous or semi-vigorous rootstocks. Next slide, thank you. The AF3 supplement pays an additional £1.16 per tree when you're establishing 5 or more different species within the field parcel. This is to encourage applicants to create diverse systems which will be more resilient to any potential tree pests and diseases, as well as any kind of strong climatic changes that we experience. It also helps offset the limited benefit you get of mass purchasing a single species. Next slide, thank you, Dan. The final new capital item for agroforestry is the PA4 agroforestry plan, which pays applicants £1,268.08. I'm afraid I have no idea why it is such a unique number, to create an agroforestry plan of their whole farm holding, to both help them design and create new agroforestry systems, as well as managing and maintaining any existing ones they may have. This is an optional extra for SFI applicants, but this will be a requirement for higher tier applications. This plan is a great starting point for you to explore how agroforestry might best fit into your farming business, as well as funding support from consultants such as Ed to help you through this. The maps that you can get out of Land App system we've just seen show really good detail, which are the kind of level of detail we'd be expecting to receive with planning applications. Last slide, thank you. Finally, this suite of offers, I want to make clear, is being delivered by both Natural England and the Forestry Commission. We have worked hand in hand with DEFRA to create this suite of offers. I have got the very great privilege of leading a team of 10 agroforestry officers across England who are there to help support and guide you through the agroforestry grants, as well as any kind of silvicultural advice you may have around your agroforestry systems. If you could please email grnationalteam@forestrycommission.gov.uk to be put in touch with your local officer. And with that, I'll just say thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, James. Really grateful for your time, and we'll probably be coming back to you shortly with some questions that are coming from the audience and for the roundtable. So for the kind of remainder of the webinar, what I'm delighted to do is introduce a number of additional speakers to come and join Ed and James to answer questions that I've prepared, but also the Q&A is looking very popular as well. So we're going to try and give as much time to those questions as we can. So firstly, we've got Nick Rowles from the Trees Outside of Woodland project. He's a project officer and has been involved in the project since its conception. So thanks, Nick, for joining. We've always got Ed Colbert, the agroforestry advisor, who you've just heard from. Delighted to have James Robinson, a dairy farmer from Cumbria, as well as the England chair for the Nature Friendly Farming Network. He's coming to join. We've got Hannah Marshall, the outreach advisor from the Northern Forest, from the Woodland Trust. And then finally, James Ramskir-Gardiner, who's from the Forestry Commission. So thank you all so much for coming to join. And just like it says at the bottom right, I can see there's loads of questions coming through, but any more, please put through. And Kathy behind the scenes is ordering them to see which ones are being asked the most priority. But I am firstly going to ask Nick, firstly, thank you for joining. I just want to get a sense of what the appetite's been from farmers to start to explore agroforestry. Have we seen a greater uptake in recent years?
Well, I've been working in Shropshire for the last 3 years, and I've been pleasantly surprised by the amount of interest in regenerative agriculture and agroforestry in particular. And during that time, we've planted 19,000 trees in 49 different agroforestry systems. There's more in the pipeline for this year, and momentum just seems to be picking up and up, really. I think it's all changed from when I did my master's 25 years ago, when there was a lot of research going on and a few pioneers planting the trees in the ground, but not much else until we left the EU, really. And the new SFI and a new approach to farming has certainly helped pique interest. Yeah.
Yeah, great, Nick. And yeah, hopefully we're going to see that uptake continue. I think it'd probably be amiss to not immediately come straight back to James Ramskir-Gardiner, if it's okay. There's been quite a few questions about the Tuesday announcement. So just to kind of quell that question, I think it'd be worth doing it now, because there's more and more people asking is just how does the announcement on Tuesday affect what you just said around capital grants?
Absolutely. Perfect timing on DEFRA's part for this webinar. Yes, so as you may or may not have seen, DEFRA have temporarily paused a lot of new applications for an awful lot of the new capital items that were released earlier this year. I've been asked to reiterate this is merely a temporary pause for these whilst they get their get kind of sorted with the vast number of applications they have already received. What this means in regards to the agroforestry options I've just gone through, AF1, AF2 and AF3, so the planting of those different, of both woodland and fruit trees and that species supplement, those have been paused temporarily, along with the tree guarding capital items that you could use alongside those, such as TE6, TE7 and TE8. What hasn't been paused, I repeat, what hasn't been paused, that what is still open for application and use is the PA4 agroforestry plan, and also the AF1, sorry, the AGF1 and AGF2, those revenue rates for agroforestry. So you can still apply to put existing agroforestry into an SFI action, and you can still apply to get a funded agroforestry plan carried out. My colleagues in the forestry have also asked me to reiterate that the UCO, the England Woodland Creation Offer, and the Woodland Creation Planning Grant schemes are not affected by this pause in capital.
Great. Thanks, James. And yeah, good timing for this webinar, I think, from that bit of announcement. So thanks for the clarity. Just talking about other ways to fund agroforestry, obviously, Forestry Commission and DEFRA one route, but delighted we've got someone from the Woodland Trust here. So Hannah, I just wondered if you could outline other routes to apply for funding with respect to Woodland Trust.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Yes, so the Woodland Trust has got a specific agroforestry fund available to all farmers and landowners in the UK, which is called Trees for Your Farm. That is funded by Sainsbury's, and we're incredibly grateful for their funding to support that. It can offer up to 100% funding for trees and protection, so that's fruit, nut, native woodland trees. Also includes bespoke on-site advice, site design, GIS mapping, tree procurement, and ongoing support with the maintenance advisory level of that. So not payments for maintenance, but the advice on how to achieve best results. And applications can be submitted year round as well, with the support of a Woodland Trust advisor like myself. And the Woodland Trust also offer more mainstream funding, like more woods and more hedges, that can also be utilised in agroforestry systems.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. And if you could share with us just how we can find more information, we'll circulate that with the recording of this webinar. Thanks, Hannah. What I want to hear from is James Robinson, who I know has been doing a lot of agroforestry on his farm. And I was just wondering, James, what benefits have you seen since you started really thinking about agroforestry to your dairy herd?
Hi, Dan, and thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky at Shropshire because we've got a huge amount of existing shade and shelter on farm via the large hedges that we've got and the way we manage them on our dairy farm. But they're not always quite in the right place, you know. So yes, they offer great shade and shelter for the majority of the time. But what we're looking to do is sort of future-proof our farm really, if we can. We're looking to weather extremes that are going to be happening in 25, 30 years time. We need to get those trees in the ground now. So we're looking at wood pasture areas, not the whole farm as wood pasture, more areas where we can run the cows into in extreme weather. So it might be that it's for shade and shelter, shade and shelter when it's when it's 35, 40 degrees. It might be for northeast winds, whatever it might be. We are trying to create areas that is going to cover a lot of that. So that's kind of what we've been establishing in the last few years. They're quite small as yet, obviously, but we are we see the benefits every day from having that shade and shelter from the existing trees and hedges.
Yeah, I mean, it's been super interesting, James, working through you. And we have got a case study coming out with Strictly Farm around kind of the future of what that tool is going to hopefully contribute to on your farm. And if anyone wants to read that, I'm sure Kathy, our marketing team, will be circulating that shortly with the Woodland Trust. Ed, I just wanted to come over to you again, and just James hinted at there kind of the benefits that agroforestry are bringing the farm. But is there any particular evidence that you can point to, or particular topics that might be worth researching?
Yeah, definitely. I think, the key evidence for me is hearing from people like James, farmers who are doing this themselves and have that evidence. Of course, that's always contextual. What works on one farm might not work on other farms. But what we do know from the livestock perspective, we understand clearly that there is an effect on animal welfare and stress from a lack of shade and shelter. And whether you're concerned about welfare or not, that has a direct correlation with animal productivity as well. So we can see where there is shade and shelter for livestock through trees. And it's not just the temperatures and the reduction of light interference, but also humidity and moisture that provides, has a direct effect on increased milk yields, increased live weight gain, and also reduction in lamb mortality in particular. There's also evidence to show a major reduction between 15 to 25% of ammonia emissions from livestock housing and slurry. So that's another kind of quantifiable result we can look to. As well as looking at biodiversity. More and more research is coming out, in particular from Reading University, around the biodiversity impact. So when we talk about wanting to increase biodiversity, it's a noble cause, but it's often quite vague. We don't know which biodiversity and the trade-offs implied. But we have seen there's an increase in earthworm counts within fields, increase in pollinators, and increase in ground beetles through agroforestry. And part of that is linked to what James was looking at in terms of that stacking functions. In part, it's including trees, which as a result in arable situations is going to create undisturbed soils. But also you can use that ground cover to put in various bumble mixes or ground-dwelling beetle mixes as well. With all that said, there is still a lot of unanswered questions, and there's a lot of work being done to really find out answers towards specifically the business case for agroforestry, developing really robust business cases. And also looking more specifically at things like nitrogen fixation in trees. So many people were attracted to the idea that you can fix nitrogen through bacterial symbiosis with certain tree species. The extent to which that has an impact on crops, in particular, is not quite quantified just yet within the UK context. So there's still lots to learn, and there's a lot of really great farmers who are leading that work to try and come up with designs that fit their goals, but also work with researchers to answer some of these questions.
Yeah, it seems like there's lots of good news and good stories to come out. And from a personal perspective, I'm really excited to see where agroforestry goes in my lifetime, particularly in my career, and anything we can do to support farmers. And I think a key part of that, and coming up to you, Hannah, is that I think a lot of farmers worry about the scale of agroforestry. I'm maybe too small to consider it or too big. What would you say to any farmers that are, I suppose, questioning what scale they should start at?
I think honestly, at any scale, that's where we're really keen to talk to everyone. Whether it is simply gapping up hedgerows, creating new hedgerows on your land and starting that process, all the way moving through to infield trees for wood pasture systems, infield alley roundels, through to those productive alley cropping systems as well. We've got internally dedicated outreach advisors, and now it's fantastic to see the Forestry Commission have a great selection of advisors as well. We're all there to help advise everyone at any scale. And it's just really exciting to have webinars like this to be able to showcase what advice is out there.
Seems like we're in a bit of a key moment in time for just helping farmers start to invest in the future. You know, they spend time investing in their buildings and infrastructure. I think it's a really good time to start investing in that natural landscape so that, you know, future generations benefit from that in that changing climate. James Ramskir-Gardiner, just wanted to ask you kind of anecdotally, how do you see tools like the Land app supporting the Forestry Commission ambition of, you know, planting more trees?
What I like, I'm quite a simple man, really. I like pictures, and I especially love maps. So I think the Land app tool that you've developed here and others like it are a great way of to see just how these trees might sit within your farming landscape. I spent quite a bit of time playing with the working with the agroforestry module on Land app, and one of my favorite things to add onto it is the buffer tool. So you can add a buffer onto each of those trees that we saw you demonstrate earlier, and you can basically jump forward in time 50 to 100 years to see what the expected canopy of that tree might look like and the area that it might cover on there. It especially works really well with the new agroforestry tree species guide released by Forest Research that you link to in your email. In that guide, it gives you an idea of how big and how dense canopies will be for the species listed, along with a lot of other useful information to help you choose the right tree for your farm. That is an area I'm quite excited that you have that capacity to really visualize what that system will look like.
Great. Yeah, playing around with it. And I think that's the key point is like, it used to feel like the bar was quite high to get an agroforestry design implemented. You know, you get Ed out for a day, for example, or Nick to come and support you, or Hannah. But now you can at least just go and have a play before you've even spoken to an advisor. Just go and have a play with those tools. Then once you see how it could look and what benefits it could bring, then it's the time to go and speak to an advisor or reach out to someone like the Woodland Trust or the Nature Friendly Farming Network, or, you know, a local advisor you may have. Thank you so much for that roundtable. I feel a bit selfish because there's been over 40 questions come through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move away from the kind of me getting to ask the questions and actually come to the audience that we've got who seem really engaged to ask a series of questions. So a question for Ed, just around traditional parkland trees. Does that come under the definition of agroforestry?
Yeah, certainly. So I think there's there's a bit of a scale between what people regard as wood pasture and parkland. And depending on there are kind of formal definitions. I think maybe James can speak to if that is covered by different grants, but both are, from my perspective, from a design perspective, dispersed plantings. That might be in a uniform grid pattern, or it can be kind of more random clumps of trees. Parkland has kind of a cultural association more with kind of large vistas on estates, old deer parks, those kind of things, hence where the term parkland comes from. Whereas wood pasture is kind of can include that, can also be a sort of sliding gradient from strictly wooded areas towards more grassland, that kind of in-between area as well. So these terms can be useful and also not useful at times. I think it's helpful to really drill into that particular context. What is it on that farm we're talking about, or we want to be achieving there?
Yeah, it's definitely around, you know, having a play, having a think, speaking to people and sharing, you know, amongst you as a group as well. Ed, just to stay with you for a moment, a question from Luke. Luke Hemmings has just asked, why do we obsess so negatively about straight lines? Do we really think birds or bees distinguish when they're looking at them as food sources or shelter?
There's two ways I can interpret that, whether we're saying it's negative that we spend too much time thinking about trees, or that people have a negative opinion of trees.
I think it's more around why should we be nervous that straight lines look artificial when it's actually the benefit that they bring as a straight line is that they use less fuel or they're more functional. I think that's what Luke's getting at. We need to change the rhetoric around straight lines. It's fine to have straight lines if they work within your system.
Totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. To answer why we obsess over that, I think it's just personal preference. For some people, they have a very particular way of what they imagine a farmed landscape to be. That might be the people on the farm. It might be local community. In the past, it's been AONBs who have a very specific cultural reference point. But you're right. If there's a tree available that's got fruit or nuts on it or pollen, a bird is not gonna, or an insect's not gonna look at it and go, it's a bit too straight for me. We can look at that by the straight lines along hedgerows and things like that on long sides of field. So it comes down to these trade-offs of how far are we pushing the dial towards a kind of commercial mechanized system, which we need to allow for machinery to go through, to allow for kind of efficient harvesting and management, compared to how far are we pushing the dial towards more kind of a greater edge effect, more dispersed planting, more mixture of habitats. And agroforestry is really there to kind of play with that dial and dance between the two.
Oh, great, and definitely agree. Just as a note, if anyone, I can see there's some hands raised, but anyone from the panel, if you want to contribute, please feel free to raise your hand. I'm just going to keep asking questions if that changes. We've got an interesting question here from David Davis, which I'm going to point at James Robinson as the farmer in the room. Is, do you have any I suppose, experience of the potential income or the kind of the impact to your revenue that agroforestry is bringing? Is there any tangible anecdotes you can tell around that?
It's purely anecdotal, I suppose, really, but it was touched on earlier on about the yield. Obviously, the yield drop that we would potentially get if we have a bare open field, so planting trees, giving that shade and shelter is benefiting not just the yield but also like the animal health as well, and then that runs through to reproduction as well, which is obviously dairy cows want to get them back in calf. So many things are affected by heat stress or by cold as well. So it's all anecdotal, but I could probably show you some data from the last hot period we had a few years ago, which would show reduced yield and a reduced fertility as well within that time. So yeah, and then in terms of revenue for us, we are getting the revenue from the stewardship schemes as well for creating wood pasture and things. So in the areas where we've planted it, you would really struggle to be able to get that, managing it intensively anyways. Plus we're of course still able to graze it as well. So it definitely fits in with our farming system.
Yeah. Just following on from that, I suppose, Hannah, I'm not sure if Woodland Trust has any resources that additional to the funding, is more around that peer-to-peer learning around the benefits it could bring. Have we got any, for example, case study farmers that we're starting to celebrate? And maybe the same question to the Forestry Commission as well.
Yeah, we do have quite an extensive online resource focusing on different agroforestry systems that we've worked with over the past decade. Less so a focus on the direct financial impact that agroforestry has, and more, as James was saying, the anecdotal impact to the farmers. I can definitely share some of the PDFs and links that can be shared around. But again, if anybody has any specific questions over their particular farming system, I'd be more than happy to share specific details with people as well.
Great, thank you. I think it's a really good moment in time to just get that peer-to-peer learning, because it is new, and as Ed said, the evidence base is still fairly weak in the UK, although it's building. But the more peer-to-peer learning and testing and trialing we can do on, just even an individual field, hopefully the better the greater benefit we're going to get. I'm going to come to Ed again. Sorry, but there's a couple of questions for you. You said there's direct evidence of animal welfare. Would be interested if there's any financial data to support that. And I think from a personal perspective, I know the Organic Research Council were working on it as well, weren't they?
Yeah, so off the top of my head, I can't kind of quote numbers specifically on finances. I've just shared, I think with that question, I typed an answer pointing both to the Soil Association's Agroforestry Handbook, where it's more than quite a few people contributed to that. So that has some good resources in. The Woodland Trust also has some publications on the benefits of trees to livestock, and hence where I got that lamb mortality reduction figure from. That comes from the Woodland Trust's work. But yeah, also the Organic Research Centre, in particular, Dr. Lindsay Wistance, really is kind of one of the leading experts on animal welfare in the UK. And so I point to those three places to find out more information and specifically the numbers there as well.
Great. Just to let everyone know, we are scheduling this webinar until 1:15, so we're not finishing at 1 o'clock. But if anyone does need to leave, there's a little survey when you do leave, but we're going to keep going for another 15 minutes as long as my speakers are happy to keep going, because we've got about 50 questions in. So I'm going to do a bit of a quick fire round now, just to try and get as much out as possible, if that's okay. So there's a couple of questions on the Land App tool, which I think I can quickly answer. Is there an intention to bring in tighter contour lines? 5 meters is not suitable at the moment. The answer is yes, Connor. This is very much a proof of concept that's iterative. So as soon as we can get access to better contour lines, the better the output's going to be. But it's pretty good at the moment at deriving that, at least, the slope general direction. And then just following on from that around data availability, at the moment, we've released this functioning in England. We can run it in Wales and Scotland, although that's not perfectly live yet. And the one limitation is the contour lines. We haven't got access to a good enough data set for us to do contour lines at the moment, which at the moment we're using LiDAR for. Just a question for James Ramskir-Gardiner. Does it matter for SFI if you're not in the low sensitivity area on the Forestry Commission's agroforestry map? I think you answered that, but could you just clarify the position on that eligibility layer?
Yes. So if you aren't within the SFI agroforestry eligibility layer, you cannot access the SFI actions and currently the capital. The route you will take would be going through the CS higher tier options, which are yet to be kind of released, though I have it on good authority. It shouldn't be too far in the future.
Yeah, great. And there's definitely some people from Wales on the call, so thank you for joining. We are working on how we can expand the offering in Wales and Scotland, both in terms of the data availability, but also we know there's been some recent announcements around schemes, so just bear with us on that. We're just trying to work through that and make sure that we get access to the right data. Question from Benjamin around livestock protection. So I'm not sure who wants to come in on this, but it's just like probably more James Ramskir-Gardiner at the moment and anyone else who's got experience, which is what options are there for livestock protection at the higher densities of planting? So if you're wanting to do high density planting and you want to protect from livestock, what options do you have available to you under the current schemes?
Yeah, it kind of comes down to how you've spatially planted those trees within that field. If you're doing kind of clump planting, cluster planting, copse, whatever kind of phrase you want to use, or even if you are planting trees in rows, but you're looking to protect it from livestock, fencing rather than individual tree guarding might be the best bet, whether it's just traditional stock fencing. I'd probably go traditional stock with an element of individual tree guards to protect from voles and other mammals that might be present, as well as deer. We can never forget about deer with planting trees. As I said, there's the capital options, which are currently paused for TE 6, 7, and 8, which are varying levels of kind of robust guarding for livestock, against livestock. I've also seen in the chat, there's been a couple of mentions about cactus guards. These are kind of a unique company. It's a unique product like sellotape. They are really great guards. They're currently not officially funded through government, but it is something we're kind of looking into because they are a very effective livestock guard.
Thanks, James.
I think James might have something to add. James
Robinson, you're on mute, my friend.
Yeah. So cactus guards, you can get them through on on statute claims. It's the one where it's does it call it well mesh or wire with barbed wire right around the outside? You can get it through on that. I would go for cactus guards all day long on an individual planting, certainly for like a wood pasture type of scheme. Dead easy to do. Join two together so you get a big enough circle loop, as it were, and then just 3 rebars in, really quick to put up, and then they're reusable, which is much more than wooden post and rail type fencing is. You'll be able to have 7-8 years time once that tree is established, you'll be able to move them along. So in terms of its sort of impact on the environment, being reusable has to be better. So yeah, all day long cactus guards for me.
Right. Thank you. So there's quite a few Land App product related questions. I think just because we've got the panel here, I'm going to avoid the feature specific ones, and maybe we could do an FAQs page on our help guidance about what's available for free. So apologies if you asked those. Someone mentioned about the shine data, which we have just got in, by the way, so we can now look at shine data. But maybe for just while we've got particularly the experts around the table, I'm just going to focus on outside of the Land Act remit. So just a question on policy. So when will the SFI system allow the stacking of actions? I think you've answered that, James, which is now the SFI system allows stacking. So that's from you, John. And just following on from that, are farmers and landowners able to claim agroforestry SFI payments from being planted and funded through the Trees for Climate and the Northern Forest funding? So I think they're just talking about stacking up the Northern Forest with the existing DEFRA grants.
Yeah, so really, really good question, and it's probably my fault for maybe not making that clear enough in my segment. The revenue and the capital, the revenue is very agnostic where those trees come from. So you can use the capital grants that I talked about for planting the trees, but you don't have to. You could go through the work that Nick and Shropshire Council do. You could go through Woodland Trust. You could go through the White Rose Forest that they're mentioning. You know, you could go, or you could completely self-fund the planting of the trees themselves. That doesn't matter for the revenue. What matters for the revenue is that you have the kind of the right numbers on eligible land of trees within that field parcel. The only limitations are for fruit and nut stocks trees. They must be on a semi-vigorous or vigorous root stock. Beyond that, you've got far more flexibility in what you can have in there. You know, I only talked through what government capital there is. You can use capital from wherever you like to fund the planting of those trees, and then apply the revenue to it, as long as you're in eligible land.
Thanks, James. And kind of following on from that, because you know I'm not out in the field every day. You know, it does feel quite confusing at times. So I just wanted to ask a relevant question from Simon, just around: is it okay? Obviously, with the agroforestry planning grant, which is a non-committal way of, I guess, getting a plan together, can you use it in parallel with a woodland management plan grant on the same holding? I.e., I want to explore both options and then decide which one's best for me.
Absolutely. So the agroforestry plan is for both creation and management, whereas the woodland management plan there is just for managing. But yes, you absolutely can use both. The agroforestry plan, whilst will take into account what woodland and other tree-based, other woody aspects you have on the farm, it isn't replacing a woodland management plan. So it doesn't deep dive into how to manage that woodland. And managing woodland is super important. So yes, you can absolutely do both. And if with my team, if anyone's applying for an agroforestry plan and they have over half a hectare of woodland on that farm, we will be talking to them and convincing them to get that woodland into management if it isn't already.
So I got a question here from Jenny around that plan at the PA4. She says it's mainly there just to cover the consultancy costs and perhaps any other data searches. I don't know if anyone around the table knows how much of that PA4 normally gets down to the farmer and how much is actually spent on consultancy. And perhaps Hannah, maybe bringing you in, can it be used in complementarity with the existing funding that the Woodland Trust offers, for example?
So I can start with that. So at the moment, we won't be able to sort of complete that plan for farmers, but the advice and site reports and GIS documents that we produce as standard anyway for free can be used within that plan to support them.
Okay, understood. So you can use it as almost like a catalyst to get the things you need in place as evidence, but it can't be used directly. Okay, so yeah, what I'm hearing is there's lots of different options out there for people that are exploring it. So please don't let funding be the blocker to you at least exploring. You know, you can try things for free, but there's lots of people here that can help steer you to where funding is available. James Ramskir-Gardiner, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to speak a little bit more on what you've just said there. I've come here today and I'm talking very much about funding. That isn't all my life or work is about. I'm here because I love trees, and I especially love trees in a farming system. The funding is just a necessary evil that goes along with it. I think what you've said there, Dan, is for me the absolute key take-home message for anyone is you should design an agroforestry system that works for your farm. It works for you as a farmer, it works for your farm business, it works for your farm landscape. You then find the suitable grant funding that will support you doing that. I would never design it around the grant. And that's where the tool you have here is so useful for being able to play around and to see what would best suit and sit in your farm.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's just, let's just explore, let's work, let's talk, let's share, because otherwise it's just going to be inertia all the time. So really like that message, James. And yeah, if anyone's taking home one message, I think that's it. So we've got 4 minutes left. I'm just going to whistle through sorry, James Ramskir-Gardiner, there's a lot of policy questions here. SFI says improved grassland is an eligible land type, but says eligible land cover permanent grassland. But says that eligible land cover is permanent grassland, sorry. Does this mean that grassland that has been a low input stewardship option for 10 or more years is no longer eligible under agroforestry? And please feel free to say unsure. We can work that one out because it's quite a complex question.
Yeah, I'm afraid I really don't know. That would be a good question to the RPA, I'm afraid. Sorry, I know about the trees. I don't know that level of detail about the different grassland options. My apologies.
No, that's absolutely fine. Just a question about Land App. The schemes designed on Land App, if you were to apply for an SFI agroforestry revenue payment, would that then class the land use as agroforestry rather than woodland? And I think probably it's just working out, when does land become, what density of tree planting does that land use go from being permanent grassland to closed canopy woodland? I don't know whether Ed, you can come in on that, or is that one for you or someone else here?
Sorry, I've been failing to multitask and reading, trying to respond to the questions as well. Can you say that again?
I was just going to say, do you know what density of trees does a land use turn from grassland into woodland according to the RPA land cover? Because I don't think they have an agroforestry land cover code at the moment.
Correct. I think a kind of key upper threshold that's good to bear in mind is anything over 400 stems per hectare will likely trigger the need for an environmental impact assessment. And yeah, I don't know if there's a specific amount of trees beyond that then totally classifies it. The key thing is asking the question, are you able to maintain your agricultural activity beneath the trees? If yes, it can remain as an agricultural parcel. If no, very likely that's become woodland and therefore is kind of locked into that. But James maybe can elaborate more on that.
Yeah, I'm going to be very quick with this because this could be a whole hour-and-a-half long webinar in of itself. And no one, particularly wants that on a Friday. It comes down to, we've almost got two different definitions of woodland we need to deal with it. We've got the ecological definition and the bureaucratical definition. I'm purely going to speak about bureaucratical. There is, on gov.uk, there was a recently updated page all about definition of trees and woodland by the Forestry Commission, by our regulation colleagues. It has a section in there about agroforestry. The short answer is go and look at that. For SFI, you cannot trigger woodland, like you cannot have aspects of infield agroforestry that would bureaucratically trigger woodland. In higher tier, it is far more flexible. You absolutely can. What you can't do, and I've noticed a couple of questions around this, you cannot apply these agroforestry offers to existing woodland. But without going into real deep dive territory, my real suggestion would be, if you're concerned, speak to one of my team. That's exactly what we're there for, as well as look at that gov.uk page.
Yeah, I think, that's probably where we're going to, fade out and begin to wrap up, because I think what we're talking about here is go and design a plan that works for you, as James says. Understand what your farm could look like. Just have a play, speak to friends, speak to family, speak to neighbours. And then when you're ready to have a conversation with an advisor, there's advisors that can help you with the more detailed elements of EIAs, triggering certain grants. And it's that is a whole piece that the time for the advisor should be spent on. I.e., if you come to an advisor with a prepared plan saying, this is roughly what I think should work for me based on my plan, it means that advisor time that you may have to pay for or may be covered through these other grants that we discussed is going to be more effectively used. I.e., the more prepared you are as a landowner with at least a rough idea of what you want to do, the further that time goes with the advisor. And that's where we're here. We're really trying to lower that bar to entry, give you a free to use tool for you to go and play around, have a look at data layers, share it with friends, so then you can hopefully progress forward. I'm just going to share my screen and just say thank you so much to all of the panelists. We're going to wrap up. Just really grateful for Nick, Ed, James, Hannah, and James as well for all their help. And Ed's got his hand up, so I don't know if you want to have a quick
note. a plug for the Agroforestry show next year. This is an amazing opportunity for anyone interested in agroforestry, be it from farming sector, forestry sector, or any kind of land-based work. It's on the 10th and 11th of September and will be taking place at Wood Oaks Farm in Maple Cross in Hertfordshire. So please come along. We also have applications open for anyone wishing to run a session or give a talk at the moment. You can find the link in the chat.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, and hopefully see you there. We can continue this conversation. So officially, what I want to say is that can be kind of the end of the webinar. Thank you all so much for coming. However, as I'm here and I've got 15 minutes spare, I'm just going to rattle through. So we recorded the answer to those land app questions. However, if you do need to disappear, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for all your contributions, but I'm just going to spend the next 15 minutes just reading out some of those land app related questions about the tool itself, and speakers, if you do need to shoot, please do. Thank you so much and really appreciate your time. Right, so there's quite a few of these, so just to rattle through them. Does it matter, are there any limitations to the amount of times you can make a design? Absolutely not. So thanks, Christian, for that question. It's there for unlimited use within the free platform. And that's right the way from just that initial concept of getting the design right the way through to actually creating a print. There are ways of creating a print for free on the OpenStreetMap. So money for using the land app is not a blocker. We do, however, a subscription tier that we'd obviously love for you to use because that keeps the lights on and pays the bills. Plus, there are some more premium data sets that you can purchase, but very much you can go all the way through from start to finish for free if you so wish. Can land app tell you how many trees it's suggested? Yes, absolutely. And I might just put that on the screen now because that's quite a nice visual thing to show is how many trees have actually been recommended by the tool to plant. So I'm just going to share my screen. So what I've got is I've got these two designs. I've got site one, which is the linear one, and site two, which was dispersed. If I want to know how many trees I'm getting in the ground, I can go up to the reports button at the top, click reports, and I can run a report for those two plans. So the Agroforestry Design 1, which is the linear one, and the Agroforestry Design number 2, which is dispersed, and hit done. And what this does is this then calculates, oh, excuse my balloons, that's me celebrating the report. Every time I do a peace sign, it seems to put up balloons. But you can see for the linear design, what we've got in total is we've got 1.49 hectares of tree row. So that's area coming out of production technically. I've got 12 hectares of kind of the working area and that buffer strip headland around the edge. And then for trees, my linear design is 640 trees, which at the moment is broken down into these categories. So what we've suggested is 204 native conifers, 194 native broadleafs, and then, yeah, you can see the numbers here. That is basically based on the density that we chose and the amount of rows that we've got, and exactly the same within this design. Slightly more simple, the dispersed one, but it's recommended 313 trees could be planted. So just comparing these two designs, the linear one is double the amount of trees than the dispersed design. So if we're trying to focus, say, on carbon or trying to focus on just number of stems, because as James Ramskir-Gardiner said, you know, there's payment per tree, linear designs might be a more effective way of getting more trees in the ground by using less area. So that's just quite a nice, hopefully, demonstration of that question. A question from Seb, which is there a way you can set the working width to be a different figure to the buffer around the area? Understand your question, Seb. So just to articulate the question, which is Seb's asked, is there kind of two parameters? You've got the parameter of, I suppose, how big you want the headland to be, which is, you know, what goes around the field and how big the central one is. We can add it, and I don't know if Michael, who's our data engineer that's built this, deserves a lot more credit than he's probably got so far. In the initial prototype that we took to Harper Adams, we did have both of those things. We had gap between trees and headland width, and the feedback was it was too many points to enter data, so we actually redacted it. Whether that moving forward changes, you know, it's easy to add, to be honest, but at the moment we just kept it consistent. You tell us the width of your machinery, and we then make sure that every row and the headland that machinery can drive on. But just to let you know that you can edit it within here. You could, for example, add a buffer. I don't know if I wanted to add some extra line. This is very messy, but hopefully you can kind of see what I'm trying to do, is I can add an extra 25 meters. and subtract, and that should then remove at least the tree rows from that area. And I just need to delete the points. So I've added 25 meters extra room to my design, and I can then select and delete these and tidy it up like so. So you've got a bit of flexibility, Seb. It's not perfect, but you can at least now amend that design to make it slightly more fit for purpose because you've got an idea that's slightly different to what the output is. So I hope that helps. And yeah, I mean, looking at this design, I'd probably consider maybe rejigging this and using the drawing tools to do that. A question from Connor: how up to date is the imagery in your model used to generate the land coverage and planting suitability? Okay, so there's a couple of things at play. So the land cover is from the RPA. So the RPA keeps an annual update of land cover codes. It used to be based on a basic payment declaration, and actually I'm unsure how it's updated at the moment. But we have a live connection to the RPA, which means if you submitted an RD1 form in the last 24 to 48 hours, Land App should find out within a day or two of that process. So it's up to 5 working days, I think we're told by the RPA, from you getting accepted to it being shown on the Land App. And it's that same data feed that the tool runs from. So it's up to 5 days old, but most of the time it's about 48 hours old. So do give a bit of time if you're wanting it, although we are working on maybe a slightly more instant update for Land App, but that's moving slightly slower than we'd like. And then just the other data layers, there's 5 or 6 or 7 different data layers that go into the product. And I think Michael very kindly did in the guidance list them out. So I think we've tried to be as transparent as possible. And if there's any questions, we're not trying to hide anything. We're just trying to make it as simple as possible. So do let us know. But in here, I think it tells you which data sets we're using, of which the update interval is down to that data provider. So we do use Natural England's data set for SSSIs and priority habitats, which gets updated as and when SSSIs or priority habitats change. We then get an update instantly within the tool. LiDAR data, which is how we get the slope, is kind of a one-off image that the Environment Agency provided. So that was done in 2021, I think, or 2022. So unless your terrain has changed massively, I don't think that's going to make much of a difference. And I can't think what other data layers we use at the top of my head, but we just use as live as possible, i.e. the tool at the point of running is using up-to-date data. We're not, all of the tools are pointing at live connections rather than us hosting a static thing, which means that if the eligibility changes or the priority habitats change, whatever, the next time you run it, that should be reflected, which means that if you ran the tool last year and this year, the output might change, not because you've changed the way you're thinking, just in terms of the data that we're ingesting might have changed. So just be aware of that. And as we iterate, which we are, things might slightly change. So do feel free to get in touch with our support team if you've got any major questions, but we're trying to keep it up to date. We're trying to keep it live, and any feedback's welcome. Does Land App work out tree species to local situation, or do you need to use the ESC tool or similar? So the ESC tool is the Ecological Site Classification tool, which is in the email that you receive when you run the tool. At the moment, we've done a national output based on some sound logic, and therefore we haven't gone right down to specific species, i.e. the outputted species. Let me just get rid of this, sorry. It's fruit. It doesn't say apple or crab apple, right? So that's down to you to speak to a local person that can help you identify what type of nut tree is best suited here. We're recommending it as a nut, but there might be certain varieties that are best suited. And yeah, the ESC tool is a good place to start. James, I'm not sure if I know there was word of at the moment, the ESC tool just outputs kind of woodland planting. It doesn't currently output agroforestry type species, does it as well?
Correct. Currently it doesn't. It was, the ESC tool's been around for a while now, and we've used it in forestry for quite a while, but it is set up for commercial forestry in the UK. That covers both broadleaf and conifer, but even then it doesn't cover all broadleaves and all conifers. There is work underway in forest research to explore the potential of an agroforestry focused version of ESC, because not only the tree species could be far wider, but also their suitability might be different in a more open grown situation rather than within a woodland. But it's certainly a great place to start. But again, it really hammers home the need of talking to silvicultural experts. Basically, you need to talk to people who know about trees to really get the best.
Yeah, great. Thanks, James. Good to have you on here. So just a question from Sam. Can you control the minimum spacing for the dispersed design to allow vehicles? Yeah, so basically when you run that data download for the dispersed design, maybe I'm wrong. No, I think this headland width also, Ed, you'll know, is this, yeah, basically the headland width here is also the width between the trees. I need to actually double check that. I think that is the case, i.e. you're always in your dispersed design be able to drive between the trees.
No, the headland width, when you're using the dispersed planting, is just dealing with that headland, so the buffer around the boundary. It does compute the alley width in the alley cropping option instead. So at present, there's not a way of determining the widths. What you would need to do as a workaround is generate the density that you're after. You can then use the ruler tool to then see the difference as Dan is demonstrating. And so in this case, we can see it's 18 meters roughly between trees. You would want to then take a good amount of space either side of those trees. And so you might consider this as a 15-meter or even 12-meter working width between those. So you then need to go back. If that was too big or too small, you need to go back and augment your density.
Right. Yeah, because interesting. Oh yeah, because it's to do with the density. Sorry, that's right. Yeah, so it's it's density driven, not width driven. Thanks, Ed. That's the bit my brain didn't quite compute.
There are
great.
some tables out there, and Dan, maybe this is something we can look at where you can get a general rule of thumb of the typical spacings based on the typical stems as well. So we could maybe have a look at including that as a resource.
Yeah, good point. I think that is built into the output of the linear design, isn't it? You can see that the different types of tree have a different spacing based on estimated canopy width. So the closer together they are, I guess the narrower their canopy is expected to grow. So that is logic built in, but perhaps we can make that available as a public facing resource as well. So what's the meterage of conifer versus? Great. So really good question here, actually. So it's how do we draw up an existing scheme? So actually, just to let you know, I know we've obviously been talking about the toolkit, but we have just released a template as well, which is just called Agroforestry. So actually you can just, he says, need to find it. We're getting rid of this drop down, by the way, because it's causing a bit of pain. Where's my Agroforestry template? You want to see it?
It was a second ago in the third column.
There it is. Sorry, thank you. Agroforestry. And so just to show you, if I created it for my area of interest, like so, I can actually go wild and draw my own agroforestry design. I can drop points, I can label them. You don't have to use our design. You can start building from scratch what your designs look like. And obviously I'm being chaotic at the moment, but hopefully just demonstrating that you can start to, use different lines, polygons, points to build a bit of a plan about what your design looks like actually on the ground. Like so. Ed, I can see your hands up. So while I'm doodling, please feel free to jump in.
So just to add another way of doing this, depending on the maturity of that agroforestry system, it could be that you can use the existing vegetation layer. And so actually run that polygon through that. And as you can see, these dark green patches indicate where there are trees. And so, yeah, if we're talking about, a mature system with full leaf exposure, then there's a chance, I don't know if this is for sure, but that would generate those alleys for you, or that wood pasture for you as it is here.
Great. Thanks, Ed. Yeah. So the just a note, this existing canopy comes from a LiDAR data set from the Environment Agency, which again is 2021, 2022. So yeah, if your agroforestry is newer than that, it probably won't come through this free data layer, although we are exploring slightly more up-to-date data as well. Right, it's bang on past. I'm really conscious of time, and I also have another meeting to attend. So I'm going to have to call the meeting there. Thank you all so much for your engagement. Thank you again to the speakers. We will share the recording and add an FAQs page onto the help guidance to try and answer as many questions as we can. But this is the start of a conversation. It's really exciting that we've got so many people here still listening in. But yeah, my marketing lead, Kathy, has just said maybe we need to do another webinar. So perhaps we might think about that. But it's really great to have you all so engaged. And thanks for coming. And enjoy your weekend when it comes. Take care. Bye-bye.